Hi, everybody. Welcome to our third unit. It is called Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. The first part is mental health. So, we're going to be talking about what is mental health. Let's get started. So, what is mental health? There isn't a huge formal definition, but mental health is comprised of three different things: biologics, psychological, social, and environmental. And you can see they kind of all come together between responses to emotions, interpersonal relationships, which can be wonderful and supportive, all the way to trauma and grief, uh, biological, between genetics, neurochemistry, but also other types of biological things that influence us, like drug effects, diets and lifestyle, social, environmental. We talked about interpersonal relationships, but other environmental things can be culture, work, um, lots of things that influence mental health on this Venn diagram. So, mental health is an intersection between biology, social environment, and psychological factors. There is some formal definition, and by the US, by the American definition on mentalhealth.gov. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. And it also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. So, our mental health really kind of is all encompassing in a lot of different things: emotional, psychological, biological, social. It has a lot to do with what we think, how we feel, how we act on those um, feelings and emotions. And it really has a lot to do with stress. It has things to do with how we relate to others and how we make choices. So, we're going to get into all of that in this part of the lesson. So, why do we care about mental health? Mental health affects us all. So, here are some facts. There's a lot of facts on this slide. So, let's go over some of them. Mental illness um, is among the most common of health conditions in the United States. More than 50% of people in America will be diagnosed with a mental illness or disorder at some point in their lifetime. So that's a lot of people um, over their lifetime will have some bout of mental illness. So it's very, very common. And, is something we should uh, consider that will either affect us or somebody that we know around us. 1 in 5 Americans will experience a mental illness in a given year. So every year, 25, 20% of us experience a mental illness. So that's a lot of people. 1 in 5 children, either currently or at some point during their life, have had a serious debilitating mental illness. So I think a lot of people think mental illness is chronic or affects a lot of adults, but it can start early in life and can be short term. So children have mental illness, bouts of mental illness. 1 in 25 Americans live with serious mental illness. So things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or major depression. And of course, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. And it accounts for more than 41,000 American lives each year, which is double the number of lives lost to homicide. So we have talked about leading causes of death before, and suicide is definitely up there and is something that is very heavily linked to mental health. And looking even deeper, this is found in your textbook, but American college students have reported a lot on surveys about their mental health. 86% of American college students feel overwhelmed. Over 46% feel hopeless. Over 32% of American college students feel depressed. 8% have considered suicide. 6%, over 6% of American college students have intentionally injured themselves, and just over 1% have attempted suicide. So it is something that affects even people here in college as well. So it's something to be aware of, and we should explore. So why is mental health important for our overall health? Mental and physical health are equally important. Mental illness, especially depression, has been shown in research to increase risks for many types of physical health problems, including stroke, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. Scientifically, a lot of mental illness, mental health problems, especially chronic conditions, long-lasting conditions, are linked to physical health problems as well. So it is very important. Our physical health is very linked to our mental health as well. The presence of chronic conditions can increase the risk for mental illness as well. So it's even reciprocal. The presence of chronic disease in our physical health can increase the risk of mental illness as well. So it's reciprocal in the other way. So physical health is definitely linked to mental health, and mental health is in turn linked to physical health. So where does mental health come from? So we say mental health, and what does that actually mean? Well, technically it comes from everywhere, right? We said biologically, we said social and environment, we said psychological. But when we really drill it down, it starts with the nervous system. And it starts specifically with the autonomic nervous system, which is the part of the nervous system that's not under constant supervision. So the type of nervous system that controls our body when we're not thinking about it. So this is the part of the nervous system that controls our heartbeat, and controls our bowels and controls when um, when we need to secrete hormones and controls when our eyes need to dilate. So controls all those functions that we don't really need to think about. And the autonomic nervous system responds to stress. And what is stress? A stressor is a situation that triggers a physical or emotional response. So now we're getting somewhere, right? So where does mental health come from? It starts in the nervous system and really kind of starts with this physical aspect of the nervous system that responds to stress. And the stress response is something that triggers these physical aspects, right? A situation that triggers physical or emotional response. So let's talk about the science of stress. What does stress do? Stress is in this curve. This is a stress curve. You can have too little stress and you can have too much stress. But it is good to have some stress. It's not great to have a lot of stress. So let's talk about that. Stress in moderate amounts pushes us forward, right? We need some stress to actually trigger some of that autonomic nervous system to help some of our things function. It allows for heightened senses. It pushes us to accomplish goals. It allows us to focus sometimes. But stress in high amounts or chronic amounts actually changes the way our brain and body functions over a long time. And what is stress technically? It really is a long chain of things, but when you boil it down, it is cortisol levels. Cortisol levels rise, and synaptic connections in the brain. So if you have really high and chronic amounts of cortisol levels, those synaptic connections in the brain tend to break down over time, and the brain can start to shrink. And this is not so great. What happens if you start to break down those connections and your brain starts to shrink? Well, it's not so great. Your prefrontal cortex or your decision-making center, you can't make decisions very easily. And your hippocampus or your cell making center starts to shrink, so you're not making any more connections, you're not making any more brain cells, so it makes it harder to learn and remember things. So you can't make decisions as easy, you can't learn and remember things as easy. So when you're under stress for a really long time and really high stress, your brain starts to malfunction. You start to get foggy. You can't make really great decisions. You can't learn very well. It makes it really hard. And you might be able to think of this in your own life. When you get really stressed out and over a long period of time, you might find your brain getting a little foggy until you take a break. And then after you have a break, then you might find yourself being like, oh, now I can think and make better decisions for myself. And that's just in a really short term, but think about this over a really, really, really long term. And that is chronic amounts. So think of people in very high stress jobs. So high stress jobs are like police work or working in skyscrapers, construction jobs. There's a lot of very high stress jobs being a 911 operator. So constantly having lives on the line is it's very hard on the brain. Okay, so come back and we will talk more